When she shouted those words, I froze. It was late at night. The city outside our apartment was quiet, except for the low hum of traffic in the distance. The air between us felt heavy, the kind that tastes like regret before you even know what went wrong. She looked straight at me, her eyes sharp, tired, trembling with frustration. "My ex-fiancé would never treat me like this," she said, and just like that, everything I thought I knew about our love began to fall apart. I didn't throw anything or storm out. I just stood there, holding the coffee mug that had gone cold in my hand, and quietly asked myself, when did we stop being on the same side? Her name is Maya. We met 3 years ago at a friend's birthday party. She was the kind of woman who made noise in a quiet room, not because she was loud, but because her presence filled the space with energy. She laughed with her whole face, moved with purpose, and looked like she had the world figured out. At that time, I was still finding my place in the city. I had recently switched jobs, living in a small rented apartment with peeling paint and mismatched furniture. My salary barely covered rent and groceries, but I didn't care. I had big dreams, and somehow Maya saw that in me before I even saw it in myself. We started talking that night about the simplest things: traffic, food, how expensive coffee had become. But something clicked. She wasn't just another pretty face. She listened. She remembered details. She asked how my week was really going, and waited for the honest answer. That night, she gave me her number, saying, "Don't wait too long to call. IDIDN." Single quotes to dot the early days of our relationship felt like sunlight through clean glass. Everything was bright, effortless, and warm. We'd meet after work for late dinners, walk through quiet streets sharing stories about our childhoods, our parents, our fears. Maya worked in marketing. She was sharp, ambitious, and unapologetically confident. She liked structure, order, and clear plans, while I was more spontaneous, always improvising my way through things. Somehow, our differences balanced each other out. When I was too relaxed, she pushed me to be better. When she got too serious, I reminded her to breathe. Our friends used to call us the steady couple, and maybe for a while, that's what we were. Not perfect, not dramatic, just a stable dot. We had our small rituals: Friday movie nights, Sunday brunch at the same cafe, and quiet evenings on the balcony watching the city lights. Sometimes she'd lean her head on my shoulder and whisper, "You make life feel calm." I'd smile, kiss her forehead, and think to myself, maybe this is what peace looks like. But the thing about peace is that it's fragile. You don't realize how thin it is until the first crack appears. It started small. Tiny disagreements that didn't mean much at first, like where to spend the weekend, how to decorate the living room, or whether to save money or travel. She'd sigh when I forgot to fold the laundry. I'd roll my eyes when she corrected my driving. Those little things, they piled up slowly. Like dust in the corners, you don't notice until one day you sneeze and wonder how it got so bad. Maya wanted things planned, clear schedules, clean spaces, stable goals. I wanted freedom, flexibility, and a little chaos. And in the beginning, we laughed about it. "You're too organized," I'd tease. "Well, someone has to balance your mess," she'd reply, smiling. But over time, the smiles faded. The tone changed. The teasing turned into tension. She'd start sentences with, "You never," and I'd respond with, "You always." Those two words, never and always, they became our weapons. I didn't see it back then, but love can quietly turn into a scoreboard. We started keeping track of who did more, who cared more, who was right more often. And once you start counting, you've already started losing. We moved into a bigger apartment after 2 years together. It was supposed to be a fresh start. New space, new energy, new chapter. The first week was beautiful. We built furniture together, argued over where to hang the paintings, and laughed when the delivery guy accidentally brought us someone else's sofa. But something about that new place changed us. Maybe it was the silence of having too much space between us. Or maybe it was the expectation that we were supposed to be happier now. Maya became more focused on her work late-night emails, weekend calls, endless deadlines. She said it was just a busy phase, but that phase stretched on for months. I tried to be supportive, cooking dinners, doing chores, making sure she didn't feel pressured. But somewhere inside, I started to feel invisible. It's strange, you can live with someone, share a bed, breathe the same air, and still feel lonely. I remember one evening when she came home late. She looked exhausted, makeup faded, eyes heavy, shoulders tense. I offered her dinner, but she brushed past me, saying she'd already eaten at the office. She didn't ask how my day was. She didn't even look at me. I watched her from the kitchen. The way she dropped her bag, changed into her nightclothes, and sat silently scrolling on her phone. And I realized we weren't talking anymore. We were just existing near each other. There were moments I tried to fix things. I planned a surprise weekend trip once, just the two of us. No laptops, no phones. She smiled when I told her, but then sighed. I can't. I have a big client meeting Monday. Maybe next time. But next time never came. I stopped trying after a while. Not because I stopped caring, but because I got tired of being the only one who did. And that's when the arguments began to shift. They weren't about chores or schedules anymore. They were about us, or rather what was left of us. She started comparing me to her past, her old colleagues, her friends' husbands, and eventually the man who once proposed to her before we met. At first I brushed it off. Then one night, during another pointless fight about me being too quiet, she said it. My ex-fiancé would never treat me like this. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because I was jealous of him, but because I realized she wasn't really talking to me anymore. She was talking to a version of me that she wished existed. I stayed silent for a long moment, then quietly said, "Maybe you should have married him then." Her eyes widened, and the silence that followed was louder than any scream could have been. That night, I slept on the couch. The next morning she made coffee, but not for me. The space between us felt colder than the floor beneath my feet. We didn't talk for days. The apartment, once full of laughter, late-night conversations, shared playlists, and silly dancing, now echoed with silence. I found myself wondering when exactly love had turned into tolerance. When did we stop holding hands and start holding grudges? When did comfort become distance? I kept replaying her words in my mind. My ex-fiancé would never treat me like this. Maybe she was right. Maybe he wouldn't have. But I also knew this. No one could love her the way I did, quietly, patiently, without conditions. Still, love isn't enough when one heart keeps walking while the other keeps waiting. The days after that argument felt strange, like living in a house that had forgotten its own warmth. We still shared the same rooms, but it was as if an invisible wall stood between us. I could hear her footsteps, smell her perfume in the hallway, see her jacket hanging by the door. Yet it all felt like traces of someone who had already left. I remember making breakfast one morning, like I always did. 2 cups of coffee, toast, and scrambled eggs. She came out of the bedroom, dressed neatly for work, eyes still swollen from lack of sleep. Without saying a word, she picked up her bag, checked her phone, and walked out. The untouched coffee steamed quietly on the counter. That small moment stayed with me more than any argument ever could. Because silence, real silence, is never empty. It's full of everything you wanted to say, but didn't. At work, I tried to keep busy. I poured myself into projects, stayed late, volunteered for extra tasks, anything to avoid going home too early. The apartment had started feeling like a museum of what once was. Every object told a story. The photo frame on the shelf, the candle we never lit again, the sofa where we once sat side by side watching old movies. I used to look forward to her messages during the day. Now my phone stayed quiet. "No, how's your day?" "No dinner tonight." Just a silence that stretched between 2 people pretending everything was fine. Sometimes she'd text around midnight, short and polite, "Don't wait up, working late." Or worse, nothing at all. A few weeks later, I tried to talk. One Saturday morning, she was on the couch, scrolling through her laptop, eyes fixed on some presentation. I sat across from her, my hands clasped together. "Maya, can we talk?" She didn't look up. "About what?" "Us," I said quietly. She sighed, closed her laptop halfway, and looked at me, not with anger, but with exhaustion. "What do you want me to say, Aarav?" "That we've changed. That we're not who we used to be." I swallowed hard. "Maybe we can fix it." I don't want this distance between us." She leaned back, rubbing her forehead. "You think I don't feel it too? But I'm tired, Aarav. I come home to more arguments than peace." Her words were calm but sharp. I wanted to reach out, to tell her we could start over, but something in her eyes told me she'd already let go of the idea of us long before she said it aloud. I nodded slowly, pretending to understand, but inside I felt something crumble that night. after she fell asleep. I stood by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. The city lights blurred in the reflection, like a painting slowly dissolving. I whispered to myself, maybe this is how love fades, not with a breakup, but with quiet resignation. In the following days, I noticed her changing routines. She started staying out later, meeting friends from work. She dressed differently, more polished, confident, distant. I told myself I was being paranoid, that she just needed space. But deep down, a small voice whispered that something had shifted, and not in my favor. One evening, while folding laundry, I found a small note in her jacket pocket. It wasn't romantic, not exactly. Just a short line on fancy stationery, "Thank you for the presentation. Couldn't have done it without you." No name, no signature. But the handwriting wasn't mine. I stared at it for a long time, wondering why such a small thing could hurt so much. It wasn't about jealousy. It was about being forgotten. The next few weeks passed in slow motion. Maya and I spoke less, smiled less, touched less. She lived like a guest, and I lived like a ghost. Sometimes, I'd catch her staring at her phone, smiling faintly, the kind of smile she once saved only for me. I wanted to ask who it was, but I couldn't. I was afraid of the answer. Afraid of confirming what my heart already knew. Then came the dinner. She suggested it one Friday evening, out of nowhere. "Let's have dinner together tomorrow," she said, eyes blank, but voice polite. It's been a while. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe she wanted to reconnect. Maybe this was her way of reaching out. I spent all Saturday preparing, cleaned the apartment, cooked her favorite pasta, even lit candles like the old days. When she walked in, she looked surprised, not touched, just surprised. "This looks nice," she said, hanging her bag by the door. We sat across from each other, plates untouched, silence heavy. I tried to start small talk, asked about her work, her friends, her health. She gave short answers, polite smiles. Finally, I said, "Maya, can we stop pretending everything's fine?" She froze for a second, fork halfway to her lips. "What do you mean?" I looked at her, really looked. "You're not here anymore. You talk, but it feels like you're somewhere else." With someone else, maybe. Her eyes flickered, then hardened. "That's not fair, Aarav." "Then tell me I'm wrong," I said softly. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, she looked away and whispered, "I don't know what you want me to say." The silence that followed was unbearable. I felt my throat tighten. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "My ex-fiancé never made me feel like this." That was it, the same comparison again. Only this time, her voice cracked in a way that made it sound final. I stood up, pushing the chair back gently. "So that's it then," I said. "You're still living in a story that ended before we even began." She blinked, startled. "Don't twist my words." "I'm not," I said quietly. "I'm just realizing that maybe I was never enough to make you forget him." She tried to respond, but tears welled up in her eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. "I know," I said. "But you did anyway." The candles flickered between us, and for a moment, I thought of all the nights we once sat there, laughing about small things, planning trips, dreaming of the future. Now, those same flames felt like they were burning the last pages of our story. After that night, we lived like strangers. We shared the same space, but not the same life. She started sleeping on her side of the bed, facing the wall. I started staying out later, wandering aimlessly through the streets, pretending to be busy. One evening, I ended up at a quiet park near the old coffee shop where we first met. I sat on a bench under a dim streetlight and just watched couples laughing, holding hands, living the kind of simplicity we had once known. I wondered when love became complicated. Was it when expectations replaced appreciation, when comparison replaced communication, or when two people stopped seeing each other as partners and started seeing each other as proof? The night was cold. I pulled my jacket tighter and whispered to myself, "I miss her." But I missed the old her, the one who looked at me like I was enough. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between us became routine. No more good mornings, no more good nights, just schedules, responsibilities, and a quiet agreement that we'd keep existing until one of us finally gave up pretending. And deep down, I think we both knew who that would be first.